On this episode of the Camp Owners Podcast, Howie and I have the amazing opportunity to sit down with Dr. G, who is an incredible friend and ally of the camp community. We talk particularly about resiliency and how navigating through this change, how we come out of this closer to who we want to be, not only as a camp, but as camp owners, for our campers and staff, and really looking at resiliency in regards to the resiliency cycle, how it can help us understand maybe some of the behavior that we see from campers and staff this summer, and the growth that will come out of this for everyone. We hope you enjoy this episode and learn as much from Dr. G as Howie and I did. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We are going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hi, everyone. My name is Howie Grossinger, and I am the co-owner of Camp Robin Hood in the suburbs of Toronto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Shuna, and I am the co-owner and director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you are looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful for other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen.
Hey, you out there. Is your team spending long hours at their desk creating the perfect summer activity schedule? Have they given up on creating the most diverse schedule for your campers? Let Camptivities help you create a balanced and engaging schedule without the mistakes. Camptivities does it all. Day camps, resident camps, auto scheduling, staff scheduling, camper and group scheduling, rainy day scheduling, and so much more. If you're looking for a better way to schedule this summer, Camptivities wants to talk to you. They'd love to show you the next big thing at camp, so check out camptivities.com to set up a time to chat. Let Camptivities help you get away from your desk and get back out to camp. GoCamp Pro has selected Camptivities as a sponsor because, like us and you, Camptivities believes in the guiding principle of being useful to the people they serve. If you can spell the word camp and spell the word activities, you can find them online at camptivities.com.
Well, Kelly, I am super excited for this show. We have a very special guest that I'm eager to introduce. Are you feeling really good about this one?
Howie, when you said you knew this person, I was like a celebrity. I'm like, what? What? Yes, I am super excited. Treat is just the beginning of how I feel about it.
We have the one and only Dr. G, Deb Gilboa, with us today. Dr. G is an incredible friend to the camp industry and has provided all of us with wonderful insight into all aspects of camp, from helping staff manage stress, changing camper behavior, to being a resource to camp parents. Dr. G's work helps all of us do stress better. Her current work on resilience and the insight she will provide today is an important discussion given the year that we've all had. Whether it's our own ability to be more resilient or our team resilience as we gear up for this summer, Dr. G is the right person to help us along this journey. Kelly, we're so excited. Hi, Dr. G.
Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. After hearing you speak at the Women in Camp Summit regarding resilience, I was going on a walk with a friend and I was like, I just heard that if our kids can feel two things at once, then that is resilience. And it's so good that they're in this together. So I have been spouting your knowledge and expertise, not just in camp, but with my community of getting through this pandemic together. So I'm so excited to have you on to speak. It's such a privilege to introduce you. So if you wouldn't mind, the way we always start off with our guests is to ask them to share their camp story. So how did working within the camp industry, as you do, or like your side job with the camp industry, how did that transpire for you, Dr. G?
I have been a camp kid from the time I was 2.5, not quite 3 years old. My parents put me in a day camp, and so I went to day camp for years, and then I got started in an overnight camp in Wisconsin, and I went there for 6 summers. And then I went back home and was a camp counselor at the day camp and did the after camp program as a counselor. And then I went to college and I needed a summer job. So I moved 500 miles to go to college, but I was like, I'm sure they have camps here. So I found my Jewish Community Center day camp and I worked there for 3 summers. And then I realized you could do overnight camp as a job. And so I started applying at the overnight camp that I wanted to be a counselor as soon as I graduated from college. And I did that for, oh goodness, almost a decade. And that love of camp slid right into having my own kids and being like, there's got to be a camp they could go to. I really do believe in there are 2 kinds of people, camp people and the folks who never had a chance to become camp people. As a matter of fact, I'm excited to say that just yesterday I did an interview for a CBS affiliate news station about camp this summer during the pandemic and got to say my favorite phrase on TV, which is, I cannot overstate the advantages to every child to having a camp experience. And so when I realized that the work that I was doing outside of, I'm a family doctor, so I see patients in the hospital and in the office, and I get to do house calls. I see kids and their parents, and sometimes their grandparents, great grandparents. But when I realized that the things that I was speaking about around resilience would be possibly useful to camp communities, I was like, what? I can do all the stuff that I love to do with camps. And that opportunity really started. I applied to speak at the Mid-States Camp Conference years ago, and Michael Brandwine's amazing team plucked my application out of the pile and called me and said, you can do this breakout, but we think you'd be a good keynote. This man named Michael Brandwine would like to speak to you on the phone. And I met the Mr. Rogers of camp, and that he really single-handedly showed me what the world of youth development professionals that the camp world is, and how I could maybe interact with those folks to enrich the work that they were doing.
What a cool story.
I think it's really amazing. As Kelly and I always talk about, the journey that everyone takes in camping is so interesting, because generally speaking, at the heart of what we do at camp is connection and telling stories. And these things really make a difference in inspiring, I know, many of the people who are listening. So we are super, super excited to have you, Dr. G. And I know that we've gotten to know each other, and you've been up, to Canada and done some stuff with us at the OCA. And I know there's so many wonderful topics that you address, that we could speak about. But we do know that this topic of resilience has been one that has really sort of taken hold in the work that you do, and all forms of media have reached out to you to get your insight, for parents, for camp industry leaders, etc. Can you just tell us a little bit, how did you land on this topic of resilience over the course of your work as a physician, but also as a resource to parents and camp owners and directors? Where did resilience come into all of this, and how did it sort of get you going?
Resilience turns out to be the answer to a question that I had been asking myself for about 10 years. As a doctor, I'm a family doctor, so I see kids and adults, as I mentioned. And what I kept seeing is that how a person seemed like they must be based on their diagnoses and their life circumstances has almost nothing to do with how people perceive themselves. So it's really true in medicine. We see all the time people who on paper are really unfortunate, right? Have lots of difficult circumstances, lots of adversity and challenges. And then you meet them and they're doing pretty well. They're really pleased with their circumstances, or they really have a sense of their own well-being and happiness. And so, okay, well, wow, what do they know? And equally, or even more so, we talk a lot in medicine about folks who on their medical chart paper look fine, but aren't fine. They're really struggling. And I don't even mean people with mental illness diagnoses. Taking that subgroup, which is 18% of adults and kids, it's not a small group, but even taking that subgroup out of the mix, looking at people's sense of well-being and belief in their own ability to just kind of be the kind of person that they want to be and be happy, does not seem, there's some gap. What's in the gap? And there is a ton of research around this. And really the word that we use to describe what's in that gap is resilience. It's really important, I think, to define that word because it's what I call a bucket word. It's a bucket we all carry around, but we often have different things in that bucket. So, when I'm lucky enough to work with kids or when I work with staff at camp, I will sometimes say, hey, what does resilience mean? The answer I get most often, most quickly, is the ability to bounce back after something hard happens. And I always say, okay, that's 100% true if you're a rubber band. But if you're a person, you can't go back to how you were before something happened. That's what's cool about being a person, and what's hard about being a person is that we are affected by every experience that we go through. And camp uses this all the time. We put kids and staff through adversity because we know how valuable and how useful and how good it can be. So if that's true, if being changed by your circumstances is a natural part of life, then resilience, the way I define it, is the ability to navigate change and come through it as much or more the kind of person you wanted to be. Not necessarily the kind of person I wanted you to be, or that your boss wanted you to be, or that your team wanted you to be, but to reunify with who you want to be. And that ability to handle change, specifically change, not just adversity or difficulty or challenge, all change requires resilience. So figuring those things out and then seeing that more and more my patients, my kids, their friends, everybody I was encountering is really afraid of this poison that we talk about in our society, which is stress. We've really labeled stress as a poison. And so I really wanted to challenge that narrative because, and I hope you guys will allow me an analogy, stress is to resilience as exercise is to body fitness. They're both awful. Right? For most of us, they're both awful. It's easy to overdo either one. They can be super damaging when you overdo them, but there's also no other way to get stronger.
Yeah. So when you think about, and I know Kelly has some thoughts around sort of the year that has been, but when you think of the course of your work on this topic, sort of pre-pandemic versus the things you spoke about or support kids and camp staff on pre-pandemic on the topic of resilience and how it's changed. I'm curious a little bit about some of those influences in terms of your messaging or the things you've learned about our ability to deal with change. I'm sure, I know Kelly and I want to learn more about how the early pandemic resilience versus a year later resilience in pandemic, and we'll get to that. But obviously the pre-pandemic thoughts around resilience are one thing, and now I'm sure they've enhanced viewpoint on what everyone has been dealing with.
I'm so excited, Kelly, to hear what you took away from the talk that I did at Women in Camps, because you took one of my central points, which is this is hard and valuable. I really don't like the word but. One of the things that we know that you said we can feel two different things at the same time, and that's resilience, is feeling that this is really hard. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. It's terrifying. It's damaging to people and finances and all kinds of things. And it's valuable. So I'm really glad that I had been doing the work I'd been doing for a couple of years and found in all of this heightened difficulty that it really proves the concept that when we have to go through something hard, we can see how it actually also helps. In that same way that I said that, it's like exercise is to body fitness. But this was like, this is like when you went on the 1 mile hike because you wanted to get a little bit more fit and you got lost and you ended up walking 20 miles uphill both ways in the snow, right? Yeah. So it's been a lot, and we have to be really careful to see who it's harming, not if, just who and when it's harming, so that we can jump in and help and protect and care for. But it's really important for us to recognize that there are a lot of people who are learning incredible things about themselves and about the people who are around them, especially kids. Our kids have this opportunity, and I'm going to say this for Howie because Kelly heard me say it. They have this opportunity to go through something tremendous upheaval and disruption while they have their people rallied around them, while their camp counselors and their coaches and their teachers and their parents are watching to see if they're okay. Most of us go through our first major upheavals and disruptions kind of alone. Certainly not when it's the topic of the nightly news and professional development that your teachers are all going to and professional development that your camp directors are going through. I had the opportunity to say in that television interview that camp directors have been working for the last year to sharpen their mental health expertise, become epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists and infection control specialists. We're all thinking about what's happening and the impact. Whereas most of the time that we deal with difficulty, the rest of the world keeps going and doesn't have the time and the space and the attention, the bandwidth to think about us and how to help us.
I feel that with my fellow camp colleagues, and that feeling grateful that there's others in the same lane that I am, and even other friends that I feel like are in a similar lane. Just to have others to walk this with has been so valuable, especially in the camp community.
Kelly, think about the question, how are you? And how that's changed. Howie, to your point, in the last 13 months, how are you used to be a social nicety. And it's now akin to getting an EKG put on you when you go to the emergency room with chest pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Somebody's like, no, but really, how are you?
And we're more honest. I think we're more honest. I mean,
because saying yes, saying fine is such an obvious lie that you kind of trip over it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that I think that leads me into thinking about when other thing it mentioned in the camp, women in camp presentation that you did, I know also in some of the ACA presentations, was that resiliency cycle. And what was so intriguing to me about, well, one, I love that it's similar to that grief cycle. So understanding that, yes, there it is. There it is. You can be in different places. And I love the reunification at the end. But what was intriguing to me is when you did a sample of your audience at Women in Camp Summit, I was in one place. And then at the ACA conference, I feel like I slid back in this cycle. But it's nice to have some words to identify those feelings. So will you talk to us a little bit about that resiliency cycle for those who haven't had the pleasure to hear it before?
For sure. And for your show notes, I'm happy to share a link to a 2-minute video and the cycle itself. But you pointed out something really important, Kelly, and that is resilience is a growth commodity. That's something I keep saying. It's not just a character trait and you have what you have and that's it. You can't grow it. You can grow it. But because it's something that can grow, it's also something that can drop. So I want to bring in a story from the corporate world to illustrate that for all of the camp owners that are listening. I was working with the CEO of a corporation. I'd been working with his leadership team for probably 2 years when this happened. This has nothing to do with the pandemic. Isn't that interesting? And imagine that. And he called me and he said, hey, you know so-and-so on our leadership team? And I said, I do. She's your go-to person. She's, seems to be someone you really rely on. And he said, yes. And now I'm really struggling because a different person on our leadership team had to step back. His mom got diagnosed with a bad cancer and he's taking some time off. I distributed everyone was very supportive. We distributed his work among the rest of us. And that person that you mentioned, who we usually can rely on to be amazing, is falling apart. Like this isn't that much work that we put on our plate. And yet even her usual obligations, it's just not getting done. And I'm not sure what I should do. I don't want to, depend on her to be superwoman, but something's going on. And I always encourage leaders that when someone is not meeting your expectations, you may feel frustrated, but try to also get curious. What don't I know? And this is something we can teach camp counselors too. When your kids aren't doing what you've asked them to do, or they're doing too much of what you want, right? They're surprising you in any way. Like you walk in and they are all ready for swimming and everybody's got their belongings away in their backpack and they're standing in a line. Be curious. Yes. Something's going on that you don't know about.
Yes.
Just like when you come in and everything's everywhere in the locker room, in the changing room for swimming, and two kids are tearing their hair out, get curious. What happened here that I don't know about? So when you're surprised, good or bad, get curious. So I said to him, kudos to you for getting curious. We had a three-way conversation. We brought her into the conversation, and it turns out that the cancer that other team member's mom had been diagnosed with was the cancer her mom had died from. And her resilience tanked. She was really impacted by that. So what we have to remember, Kelly, is that it makes sense to me that you were in one place and that later you might have, you said go backwards, but I would say be at a different point in the cycle because something was impacting you differently. And I hope that at the time you thought, wow, what is putting me in what I consider to be a less desirable part of this cycle right now? And that, if you makes you curious about yourself, I want you to think either, do I need somebody's help here, right? Should I be reaching out for help that I'm not getting? Or what am I not noticing about something that's hard for me? That's really valuable. So what are we talking about? What's this resilience cycle? Hey, we're on video, right? People can actually see this. So I'm going to show you guys this, hopefully close enough that it's a little bit visible, but we're going to share it as well. This is a cycle that says, hey, okay, a change drops in. What happens? Well, the first thing that happens, the first three things that happen are kind of icky. The first three things our brain does with any change, even change we want, like a new job, or let's say you offer a position to somebody to be your program director that you really want, and they call you up and they accept it. Right? This is good news. It's going to take a lot off your plate. You're excited to work with them, get to see them all the time. They have great ideas. Still, the first thing your brain will do is be like, wait, what am I going to lose? What am I going to have to tell the person who's been pitching in to do this? Which of my other staff are going to feel weird about this? What am I going to lose in terms of, is this person going to expect me to work on a day that I usually don't work? I fill it in, in the evenings, weekends, whatever. What am I going to lose? And then distrust. Are they really going to take it? Are they as good as I think they're going to be? Are they going to like me? Are they going to see what I'm not good at? And then even as you start to believe this change is really happening, discomfort. They drink coffee and it smells really strongly, and I don't want to tell them, but I don't like that. Or, it can be really in the weeds things, or really big things. They're a lip smacker, and it's driving me bananas. The reason that our brain does this, and it's really important to know about ourselves, but it's even more important to know about the people that we lead, that every time our brain encounters a change, it does this skeptical dance, and that's for a really good reason. Our brain has one overriding principle, and that's to keep us alive. That may sound really basic, but here's the thing. You are currently alive. So your brain is mistrustful of every change because this could be the change that kills us. Your brain has this one job, which is basically to support the status quo. Keep your heart beating, keep you breathing, keep the food available, keep the shelter in place, keep clothing, keep your relationships that make you feel safe and okay, keep your identity and your sense of self, keep going. Even if the situation you're in isn't good, it's still alive. So your brain defaults to protecting the status quo. You can easily overcome this, but understanding that this is natural for everyone helps leaders especially. And here's why. You as a leader are often the messenger of change. Sometimes you're the decider, but as we've seen in the last year, even when you didn't decide anything about this change, you still have to tell everyone about it and how it's going to impact you. It's very easy when you deliver a change message to your team and they have this response, loss or grief, distrust, discomfort, loss and grief being all in the same, distrust and discomfort, for you to feel betrayed. As a leader, we often feel betrayed when we announce a change or discuss a change and get a negative reaction. Don't you trust me? Don't you know that I have your best interest at heart? Don't you know haven't I proven myself? Isn't our mission clear? Whether you're talking about giving that change to your staff, to your campers, to your families, change is a disruption. So if you know, okay, there's going to be some people who come out with their loss, some their distrust, some their discomfort. Everybody needs empathy, information, and breathing room to have any chance of moving to a different part of this cycle. Then you'll be less offended, less hurt by those reactions. So I think that's the most useful thing to know about the beginning of this cycle.
Dr. G, it's so interesting that you described it that way, because I think of the early part of the pandemic and the decisions and the waiting for whether camps were going to open. And for our overnight camp friends in many places across North America, we were told we couldn't open. Many of us in the day camp space, some of us forged on and made it work, and some of us made the difficult decision. Your last description has me thinking about, the moment where I had to tell my leadership team that we made the decision, the most painful decision professionally, not to move forward. And, taking on the burden of what that means for their employment, for the tradition of being at camp. You talked about the empathy. It was reassuring, as I'm sure for many of us in the camping world, like how many of our staff were with us. They made that change in many ways. And maybe it's because it's camp too, in many ways, that they made that a lot easier than either we thought it was going to be to share it with them, or just it made getting over the hump of that decision that much easier, because the change we knew was coming and that we had to share was met with, thankfully, because we work with great people, with that empathy. But I do know that, once the decision was made, we didn't know what the next several months would look like. And, whatever crystal ball we were trying to, look into, we couldn't, there's no way we could predict. So a lot of this stuff really sort of resonates with me personally too. But I'm sure beyond camp, when you think of, just general issues of being resilient around the issues of isolation and loneliness that people, my daughter, my eldest, she leased an apartment in the city the 1st of March last year, thinking she was going to be excited to move.
Great idea at the time.
At the time, it seemed like a great idea. And just, that change in and of itself was huge. And then you add what happened 2-3 weeks later, and, trying to overcome that, that issue of that kind of change. So there are lots of great examples that, I take with me in terms of the resilience cycle. But it also serves for me, and maybe we can talk a little bit about staff recruitment right now, because I find myself, when I'm interviewing staff, and Kelly, I'm curious about your thoughts as you go through this process as well, is I'm using the last year as, this once in 100-year pandemic. You've got the best story to tell 25 years from now, that you bounced back. And I know it's the simple answer to resilience, but you have proof that you got through something really hard, and now this great opportunity to give back to kids and prove to yourself that, you can handle a lot of stuff that maybe you didn't think you could handle. So I'm trying to parlay resilience into actually building confidence that they've got this, like you can do this and come out of this in a good way. I'm wondering, of some of the things I've said, what are your thoughts related to that?
So I think that it's really important to recognize what you're talking about, Howie, that we have been through a collective experience. And that's that part I was mentioning that is an advantage to this difficult path that we've been on, that we all know that we've all faced difficulty. Nobody has to wonder if this last year has been hard. Nobody has to decide if they're going to disclose or not disclose that it was hard. There may be details that they choose to give. And I do think it's important, as we think forward as leaders, to really consider the resilience that is going to be necessary for some people to re-engage with camp. Have you guys noticed that you watch a TV show or a movie that was shot pre-pandemic and you're a little horrified to see people in groups without masks?
Oh yeah. I'm like, you're too close. Stop hugging. What's going on?
It's distracting. It takes you out of enjoying the show or the movie, or just getting lost in the entertainment of it. Well, that's a small example of a difficulty that I think a lot of people are going to notice. I really want camp directors to keep in mind this year 2 things about how this is going to play out and coming back. One, all change is hard, even camp opening back up, or getting to come to camp if they didn't come last year, even if your camp ran. All change is hard, like getting a vaccine. Even though we have prayed for things that would end the pandemic, wished for, hoped for things that would end the pandemic, we're seeing a ton of vaccine hesitancy. And some of that is because it is a change on top of a ton of experiences that have drained people's resilience. It is unfortunate that we have a lot of lore around this idea that you should trust your first instinct and go with your gut, because your gut reaction to any change is loss, distrust, and discomfort, including things like the opportunity to get vaccinated. Now, like I said, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of information, and many people can get themselves past that or help other people to get past it, because the next piece in the resilience cycle is choice. Is to remember, just act remembering that you have choices, not listing them and acting on them. That comes a minute later. Just remembering that you still have choices, that's a resilient act. And that puts you on the path to the upswing in the resilience cycle. But that experience of even good change to help get us to more of a circumstance or an environment that we want is still hard. And the other thing I really want camp directors to remember is that some of the people you're talking about, Howie, some of the staff who've gotten through this year, because we're still going through it, they're holding it together. And if camp is a place they've been before, any camp, and they get there and they feel safe, and truly start to believe that they can have the interactions they want, that might be when they lose it. That might be when emotionally they start sobbing, whatever that looks like for them. As parents, have you had the experience of having your kid in a really dangerous or sick situation? You hold it together, you do everything you got to do, you comfort your child, you get the information, you advocate, they're okay. You get them home, tuck them in their bed. And like Howie, I know you've had the experience of a kid with a concussion, so I think this is a great example. You get them home, you tuck them in their bed, and then you have your meltdown. Well, that's because of your resilient skills and how you use them, but that's exercise and you need a recovery phase. And I want camp directors, specifically camp directors, I don't think this is going to happen at schools and other settings, to keep in mind, camp may be, especially for staff and older campers, their recovery phase.
I really like that. I've talked with staff, a couple of staff this summer, especially our leaders in training program, who are going to have some of those older campers, about when things happen at camp this summer, emotions, behavior. I think we're going to have a lot. It's going to be hard to discern in many moments. Like, is this really about what just happened
here?
Or is this about like what we're bringing within that backpack of baggage that we brought with us to camp? So I think there's gonna be a lot of that, a lot of, okay, let's stop for a moment. Let's figure out what's really this is about. I think I like that it's a recovery phase or a time of recovery.
I had a conversation with Steve from Camp Champion about how he ran last summer and how it went, I think in his words, better than he expected, until about 15 days before everybody was going home, especially staff. And then all of a sudden, because it was that returning to the pandemic world from what felt like a safe, okay space. So there are going to be some people who are great at camp until they have to start thinking about after camp. And this is true of day camp experiences as much as overnight camp experiences, I think, because you get into camp mode and you kind of can forget that even if you're going home every night, the rest of the world isn't really real. Camp is what's
exactly.
And so you're doing it, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, I can have a doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. on that Tuesday because camp will be over by then. And you're like, wait, what? I'm sorry, what now? Over? What does that mean? And so a portion of our staff may have a harder time this year than in previous years with that contemplating AC after camp than we've seen before.
Yeah, but we do that naturally, don't we? Sometimes if we're even on vacation, right? We can settle into vacation, but it's like T minus 48 hours back to the real life. And then all of a sudden, we're sort of, other
that
behaviors.
Stuff gets real.
That stuff totally. And we sort of go into that mode. So I can totally see that happening. But I do anticipate the emotion of returning to something that you've always relied on after an extended break from it, and the emotions and how adaptable they're going to staff and campers will have to be to this returning to camp. I mean, the reality is that so many of us are communicating consistently on what it might look like and what changes we're looking to making. And we can all communicate those changes. But I would imagine, Dr. G, like so many of this is we just don't know until we get our communities on site of what like really is going to go down. So I guess
say to medical students all the time, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And that's really what it is. But Kelly and Howie, you've probably, just by how long you've been in the business, had the experience of having a child come to camp who's lost a close family member that year.
Right.
And these often, because I worked at a lot of camps who've had this experience, they hear from the family, the kid's doing okay. They're really looking forward to coming to camp. Camp's their happy place. Thank you so much for having them. They get there. They're really relieved to be there. They really seem to be doing okay. And then to your point, something small or something totally seemingly unrelated happens, and this child is decompensating in front of your eyes. And you, at first you're like, oh no. And then you think, oh wait, this is exactly why I wanted them to be here. This is the place for this to happen. But we have to think about how to scale that support this year and not be caught off guard by what you're already talking about, Kelly, the increased emotional needs and that secondary trauma of having staff who've held it together and are in their professional mode and then are talking to kids about what they've been through, or a colleague about a peer about what they've been through, and it triggers something in them. One of the best things that we can do this summer is really remind everybody that instead of asking what's wrong with you or what went wrong here, saying what happened to you and what happened.
Mm-hmm. When you think about, we don't all get the benefit of having Dr. G talk to our parents and to our staff, etc. But when you
but please call if you want.
Please call Dr. G, and in the show
Operators
notes,
are standing by.
And the show notes will have contact information, and our operators are standing by. Exactly. Having said that, I'm sure that, we've been talking in previous shows, and it's going to be a focus of ours throughout the season, is staff training and getting our staff ready. What do you think are some things you'd like camp owners and directors to be thinking about as we deal with staff training and, things that can serve staff individually quite well as they come back into orientation and staff training, but also in prepping them for when the campers step off the bus? What are some things, maybe just some thoughts on what we should be thinking about?
So here's some good news for camp owners and directors when you think about this. It would always have been true, but it is especially true for Gen Z and millennial folks, that this year training and support are the same thing. So when you are supporting your staff, when you're thinking about what you're going to build in to allow them some time for processing and for reconnecting and all those things, I think a lot of people, when we're designing staff training, we have like different buckets in our head, right? There's the certification time that we need. We got to get people to have the child abuse training so we can check that box. We've got the training time. We're going to talk about child development, or how we get kids to find their backpack, or how we talk to kids who are in conflict. And we have our icebreakers and staff camaraderie building time. Yeah, it's all one now. And what I meant about Gen Z and millennials is, unlike Gen X, and a lot of our camp owners and directors are Gen X, they don't compartmentalize. One of the things we know about millennial employees and Gen Z employees is they don't think about professional development and personal development, for example. It's just all development. So anything that helps me helps me. And if you're asking me to spend time with you professionally, then I'm just spending time with you. And so you can use all of those great moments that you would have definitely planned in this summer anyway, that you would think of as building camaraderie or teamwork or support. All of that is train the trainer for what they're going to do with their kids. I hope that everybody is taking advantage of this upheaval and disruption. Whether you ran last summer or you didn't, nobody expects summer 2021 to look just like summer 2020. We've learned too much since then. Great. So I hope you'll take advantage of this disruption to make some changes you want to make, whether that's opening up schedules or structuring things more, whether that's having fewer activities per day or more choice, whatever it is. This is a great opportunity for change. because everyone expects change. Your staff is going to be more open-minded. There is, in my opinion, nobody more closed-minded to change than a second-year staff person who was a camper at your camp.
I love that. That's
right.
Yep.
That is the person who's like, this is not how we have always done it.
Oh,
Facts.
yeah.
Facts, facts, facts.
Facts.
But even those people, even your second year staff person who was a camper and grew up every year at your camp, this year, they expect that some things will be different. So please take advantage of that to make camp look more, even more aligned with your mission. And it's a great time to really re-examine your mission in light of everything that's happened and think, and I'm going to hit you where it hurts, Howie, is volleyball more important?
Oh.
Or is recharging more important?
Oh, Dr. G.
I know.
I know.
I'm playing for big stakes here. And if Howie can agree with that, he can agree with everything.
Well,
right to his heart, right to his serving arm.
Right to my serving arm. Yes. But it's true. And I think that we as camp owners have an opportunity to model tackling change and tackling those things, because we're often seen as the people who are maybe dug in a little bit on ways to do things. And I think it may be quite invigorating and motivating to staff to hear you say, and I just recently went through this myself. It was like, here's the daily schedule. I'm open to blowing it up. Like, what do you think, guys? We normally
start at noon. Just kidding.
Yeah. we have 2 swim periods a day, and we're considering pool geography and how many cohorts. And I said, let's throw it all out there. And out of some of these things, Kelly, and we've talked about this in the past, is like, these may become the new ways of doing things because of this. The new amazingness, necessity is the mother of invention. I've said that before on the show, and we're being forced, to think differently that may end up evolving into the way we now do things consistently. So it's really
cool. It wasn't
for
nothing that I used that to answer your question about staff training, because that conversation that you had with your team about blowing up the schedule, that's staff training.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's training them to think differently and to behave differently and to listen differently. Every single thing that you do. And now, right now, in the spring of 2021, your staff doesn't expect you to wait until they've finished with their schooling obligations before you try to train them for next summer. Mm-hmm. They want you to reach out and give them opportunities to see their camp people's faces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And setting up, like you said, that culture now. In my returning staff interviews, I've been saying to them, okay, this is the summer to innovate. So nothing has to be the same. So what are your pressure points of the day? What are the most stressful parts of your day? And let's look at them and say, does it have to be that way? Why have we always done that? We might not be able to change it, but I'm trying to get them to already be thinking about change, looking at it differently, opportunity versus obstacle, and be working with me towards that. And then to say, okay, well, let's switch it up, because
a camp that I'm working with is tossing in nap time for their teens.
Ooh.
Nobody's ever done that I know of at camp before on a consistent basis. Right. But like they're just planning it, right? I mean, you think of it as rest hour, but they separate from rest hour. Some day camps have that. A lot of overnight camps have that. They went to their leadership for their teens and said, when are they the least engaged and really need a chance to recharge? Should it be with music? Should it be, should even at day camp, should you bring a sleeping bag? Like, what's it going to look like? Where can it be? We want it to be outside. We're just going to let them nap. And, and so, I mean, I think nearly everything is possible. One of the great things that happens when you experience disruption is that you realize that things that you thought were written in stone are really written in sand. One of the awful things about disruption is that you realize that things you thought were written in stone are written in sand. So helping everybody see the two sides of that coin is valuable. Hey, I don't want to leave anybody hanging about the rest of the resilience cycle before we finish. Yeah. So I just want to mention, so I said, we got these 3 hard things that happen right on the heels of each other when we experience change, that it goes loss, distrust, and discomfort. And then I said, choice is where you're headed. As soon as you just remember that you have choices, that's when you're starting to act in a resilient way, which, to Kelly's point, doesn't mean you're not still feeling some loss or distrust or discomfort, but you are also thinking about choices. What choices do I have? As soon as you pick one or more of those choices, that's engagement. And engagement, again, doesn't mean that you're 100% on board, or that you're not feeling grief about loss, or that it's not uncomfortable. We know, and camp people are fantastic at accepting discomfort as part of the price of growth. It's necessary for growth. And then when people are engaging, that's when they get to reunify, and not necessarily reunify with your whole staff or your camp or even their best friend, but reunify with that sense of who it is they want to be. And that's what every opportunity, every change makes us, but also allows us to have the opportunity to move through that. As leaders, the way we can move people through it a little bit more gently, more smoothly, more quickly, are those three things that I mentioned: empathy, time to process, and information.
Mhm. Well, I think that that's helpful. I don't know how what you think, but when I hear you say that, I think for the camp owners and directors listening to that, I hope that that gives them some confidence and encouragement and comfort in your applying that, but also to your rubber band idea, is that families and staff, hopefully, and camp owners shouldn't expect our camps to bounce back like the rubber band to what it was. Like, we can expect to reunification as a camp become who we want to be this summer, or campers and staff are expecting that we're going to be different. And so we have to stop this, like, we need to go back to exactly how we were doing it and it was great. It's, who do we want to be on the other side of this, and how can we get closer to the new us, or are we a different, what do we want it more to be? I think for me, that feels like, okay, I don't have the pressure to be who we were, because I'm never going to be who we were before this.
Yeah. I was also wondering, Dr. G, related to that is, messaging to parents for camp owners, because we know that, parents who sent their kids to camp in 2020, many parents are returning to camp, for their kids in 2021 since 2019. Like, we're hearing lots about camp directors anecdotally about how parents, had a different outlook towards, in many ways, to what they expected from camp directors and camp owners. But this notion of discomfort, that you were talking about, we know we live in a world where so many of our parents don't want our kids to go through discomfort. They see it as a bad thing and they protect them at all costs. But I'm wondering, on this topic of discomfort and messaging to parents and prepping parents for the experience their kids are going to have, any quick thoughts on, and I know there's lots of thoughts. I know you, but I'm wondering if we could extend the conversation to the communication between camp and home, owners, directors, and parents about setting expectations around this topic.
Absolutely. I'll give two suggestions. One is something I've said already: go back to your mission. Help everybody see how navigating this the way you're choosing to navigate it really supports and aligns with your mission to help kids be stronger or healthier or feel safer, whatever it is. If you have difficult information to give anyone in any of your stakeholders, whether it's your board or your staff or your campers or your families or all of them, when you can say, this is how it aligns with our mission, people don't like it more necessarily, but they accept it much more easily, because by sending themselves or their kids to your camp, they have bought into your mission. That's why they're there. So that's one piece. The second piece, whenever you want someone to change their way of looking at something, you have to attach the new idea, the change, to a goal they already had. So you are, as camp directors and owners, experts in your families. I know that when Howie says pushback from families, you already know which families. You may have their phone numbers in quick dial in your cell phone, or at least you would recognize their number if it came up on a caller ID. So you're experts in them. Remind yourself of what it is that family or those group of families really want most, and then help them understand how whatever change you're announcing or putting into place or that they're facing helps their kids get closer to that goal.
Oh, Dr. G, it is so hard to end part of this conversation because you're so valuable in the things you have to say. And I feel like, Howie, we could keep talking about this forever, but I love that we ended with how we can work with families and campers. And I did take lots of notes. I proclaim myself as the Gabs in training. But some of the things I really love that you said was the growth commodity. Man, we have a lot of commodity right now with that. And the rubber band, resilience cycle, when we get surprised, get curious, there's so many amazing notes. And I think I'll start adding these to our show notes. But it is that time where we move on to what our inspiration is or what's inspiring us right now. So Dr. G, what we do is at the end of each show, we share something. It can be a book, an article, podcast, documentary, leadership quote, just anything that is lighting a fire for you at this moment to be a better camp professional or just professional. I'll start, excuse me, and then we'll have how we go, and then Dr. G, if you want to share is at the end, that'd be great. So what I wanted to share today was I recently listened to, it won't surprise you either, Howie, the most recent, not the most recent, but a podcast from January with Melinda Gates and Brene Brown, and it was about empowering women and girls. And there was so many amazing takeaways, but Melinda Gates just recently wrote a book called The Moment of Lift. And it's the idea of when we lift each other, and she was particularly speaking about women and girls, we lift everyone, and having that global perspective. And really what I liked that Brene said in there is she said, her husband wants the things for her that she wants for herself. And I just loved that idea of wanting things for the people you love because that's what they want for themselves, and lifting each other. So I loved that episode. I know, right? It was so
Totally
good. It was just, I want that, right? Don't you want that for your sons and daughters and the people you love? So that one, there was a lot of good takeaways for me with that. So I'll put the link for that episode in here. Howie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. I have a couple just really quickly. Working with my team recently, I got introduced to something that provided a lot of boost to our conversation, and that was something called Jamboard. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I'll put the link in the show notes, but it was just a really way. My family, my daughter and my wife love sticky notes and making notes everywhere. And this was a really cool, and I know there's different apps for it, but we were doing a huge brainstorming session on enhancements or changes that we're looking to for facility. And it could be used for anything. We use Jamboard to create sticky notes and different things. And it was just a really, really cool thing. So it's a resource that I think many of you can use. So I just wanted to throw that. But purely from an inspirational point of view, and I know some of this is happening down in the US, but up here in the Toronto area in Ontario, we're getting a lot of great media coverage about camp and parents starting to think about camp. And there's been more engagement now that March is here. At the time of the airing of this episode, will probably be, March still. But I think that the fact that the media is engaging the camp industry and trying to wake up our political leaders to giving overnight camps the green light and supporting the return to camp, and how it will be a very healthy, necessary thing for youth to do. It's been kind of inspirational. I think it's sort of inflated us a little bit, and we've got a lighter step moving forward with communication. So the media up here at least has, I think ramping up some of their communication with the greater public. So that's very encouraging, and I hope it happens everywhere.
Good.
Dr. G, what's inspiring you these days?
I got to listen to an interview with the writing team from DreamWorks. They make a lot of really cool movies, right?
Yeah.
And they said every story is different, but their structure is pretty much the same. DreamWorks movies, like a lot of the stories that we all know, are really in 3 acts. In the first act, they said, we set up the hero and the problem and get to know the characters. And in the second act, the hero tries every easy, comfortable way to solve the problem, and it doesn't work, while becoming more and more aware of the cost, the vulnerability, the risk it would take to really solve the problem. In the third act, they pay the price with vulnerability or with risk or whatever it is, and usually they succeed in solving the problem. No guarantees, this person said. But that idea that in the second act, that's when we try every easy, comfortable, it'll be okay if I just ignore it, or I'm sure there's a way to get someone else to do it kind of way to solve the problem, and it's never going to work, but we have to go through that process to get to the point where we're willing to take the bigger risk or do something that's more uncomfortable and really be resilient. I thought that was really valuable because I hadn't thought about how all those other choices, they weren't just like, oh, well, it could have worked just as likely as the other thing. I just, it didn't. It's
Right.
it's really gearing yourself up to be truly resilient and really attack the change. And that's helped me to have more empathy for my kids as they try every easy, comfortable way to solve me wanting their room to be clean, or their teachers wanting them to pay attention on Zoom, or getting their homework done, until they actually have to sacrifice and do it. That those easy, comfortable ways are part of the process. So for people who are often working with people who are under the age of 26 and are pretty positive that their easy, comfortable way will work no matter what you say, this gives us a little bit more empathy that they're in the second act of that process.
That's a great description. I love that. Is that so? Where would we find that interview if people wanted to listen?
I have to find the podcast, but I'll find it.
Okay, great. So Dr. G is going to get that to us, and we'll put the link up in the show notes for sure. So please look in the show notes for that. Thank you so much. Dr. G, this has been incredible. We're so honored to have you on the show, and what wonderful insight to a very important topic. So thank you for sharing your valuable time with us. If people wanted to get a hold of you or connect with you, what are the ways they can learn more about Dr. G and connect?
The easiest way is to go to my site, which is askdrg.com. And I'm on social media. Wow, you can find me in the Summer Camp Professionals group, and through anybody you know who's in Go Camp Pro, they know how to find me. And I'll give you my email as well for the show notes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Kelly, how do we get a hold of you?
You can email me at kelly@hiddenpinesranch.com.
And for me, it's Howie at camprobinhood.ca. Please connect with any questions or suggestions for the show. Kelly and I would love to hear from you. Please don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff there from our show and other amazing Go Camp Pro podcasts that are out there. Dr. G, thank you once again. Kelly, amazing. Thank you. Always great spending time with you and our wonderful guests. We hope you really enjoyed this. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again and you tuning in to the next Camp Owners podcast. Bye, everyone.